Welcome to WOW, or Women of Worth. I'm Michelle Martin. Today we cross from New York to India, back to Singapore. We've got some great stories and platforms to share with you on projects that are empowering women in Southeast Asia. But first, in just a few hours' time, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon will convene the UN Climate Summit to discuss what he describes as the defining issue of our time, climate change. He has invited world leaders from government, finance, business, and civil society to bring bold announcements to the Climate Summit today. The hope is that the announcements will lead to reduced emissions, strengthen climate resilience, and mobilize political will for meaningful legal agreements in 2015 to reach the goal of reducing global warming. Just 2 days ago, some 250,000 people from over 1,500 groups marched through the streets of New York, joined by thousands of others in cities around the world in solidarity events for what's been described as the largest climate march in history. Rosa Lizarde is the global director of the Feminist task force. She joined with other women's groups to participate in the People's Climate March on Sunday. Rosa, thank you so much for joining us all the way from New York. You were on the front lines with a contingent of women for the People's Climate March. Share with us your impressions on the ground and what was the message that your contingent wanted to convey?
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks. It was very exciting to march with the Women for Climate Justice contingent. The women were part of the separate groups that were organizing for the climate march, along with labor and indigenous people and community groups from New York. The Women for Climate Justice brought together a number of women's organizations, community groups, grassroots women. I mean, I think that our contingent was one of the most diverse of the many that I saw. Many focused on specific issues, or many coming from different parts of the United States, but also a very international group. Our contingent really focused on the voice of women within this climate debate. Women, particularly from the Global South, who have contributed least to the global warming and degradation of the planet, yet they are suffering the most from environmental destruction and really unsustainable consumption and production patterns.
Now, Rosa, a lot of our listeners may be surprised to learn that there is a link between gender and climate change. Rosa, why is climate change a women's issue?
Well, there is certainly a link. I think when you talk about climate change and how that is exacerbating poverty, you're talking about a women's issue. And let me just say that, the number has gone up from 200,000 to 400,000 people on the streets of New York City as an official count of the organizers. So we really did see people and women and everyone coming out for this. The reason why there is such a link between climate change and women's rights, women's gender justice, is really because women are at the front line of this climate chaos. When we talk about decreased agricultural production, and women traditionally in the role of being the caretaker, the one who is relying on agriculture for their income, is going to be impacted by this climate change. When women are fetching water and have to walk further because their streams have dried up, or because the rivers have changed course because of climate change. And we're seeing that because of the longer dry spells, the desertification. That's going to have devastating effects on women. So the increased food insecurity, also in terms of the loss or the contamination of local water, that is going to have an impact on women. And also for many rural women and their families, when they lose in agriculture, they're really losing their means of income, which means that they may have to migrate or they may be displaced, and that's happening all over the world, primarily in the global south.
So women are among the most affected by climate change and need to be part of the solution for it. Rosa, share with us what you think, as Global Director of the Feminist Task Force, what you think needs to emerge from the UN Climate Summit.
Well, the UN Climate Summit, I mean, this is really, Ban Ki-moon trying to make sure that, his legacy is intact. And, let's give him credit for bringing together, over 130 heads of state.
But India and China are not represented. They didn't even turn up.
Exactly. So I think that it is a very strong, bold move on the Secretary General's part. However, let's really look at what this is. This is the climate summit, as you said, with finance, with the business sector. And we're really looking, as women's contingent, we're really looking at this casual promotion of public-private partnerships to catalyze action on climate. And so I think one of the messages that we're taking into the climate summit, and you mentioned civil society as a part of this, there will only be 38 representatives of civil society at the climate summit. So in a sense, it's not completely closed off, and give credit to the Secretary General's office for really pushing for civil society. It actually is a much larger group than in past summits, certainly during the UN General Assembly activities happening today, which are, there's high security. But one of the messages we want to take is, let's use caution to promote this public-private partnership. Let's look at, it's not just business, it's big business. And is business using this climate summit to blue wash, what they're doing in other countries, maybe not their own, but in developing countries around the extractive industries, around the water issues and the water wars that we're seeing. We're also calling for a rigorous adherence to the human rights framework and the already legally binding agreement for sustainable development for human rights, which is really the foundation of the UN. So, these two are one of the main messages because of the nature of the climate summit. But of course, it's also that women have to have a place at the table in finding solutions in the decision-making in any of these important spaces. And we will have partners there who, there's only one speaking spot for civil society.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I know your organization works to facilitate tribunals to bring women's voices to the forefront of this issue. So thank you so very much for joining us, and good luck with your work as well. Rosa Lizarde, the Global Director of the Feminist Task Force, she was a participant of the People's Climate March on Sunday, sharing with us a little bit about how mass protests are galvanizing political action on climate change and women's seat at the table there. We'll continue with WOW when we come back. Projects that are empowering women in Southeast Asia. Dale Edmonds from Riverkids joins me, and we're going to find out more about the work that she and her organization are doing to stop child trafficking and to help rehabilitate sex trafficked women as well. That's coming up in just a while. We'll also cross live to India to find out more about a fantastic project that is reaching out to 8,000 teenage girls. It's an entrepreneurial education program. Stay tuned.
Add to your Wow Factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
Welcome to WOW, or Women of Worth. Just a while ago, there was a project called Project Inspire, 5 Minutes to Change the World. It's been held since, I believe, 2011 here in Singapore, organized by UN Women and MasterCard. And it looks at awarding organizations that are successful in a 5-minute pitch with the funds they need to get their projects off the ground, off and running. And so we have two wonderful women with us today. Joining me live all the way from India is Shrutikantha Kandali, and she represents Going to School. Shruti, how are you? Shruti? Okay, we'll give Shruti a couple of seconds to come to the phone. In the meantime, we say welcome to Dale Edmonds from Riverkids. Congratulations. First up, Dale, Riverkids did really well at Project Inspire.
We were thrilled. We got second place, runner-up, and the best part was runner-up wasn't even there before last year, so we snatched a brand new prize.
Hey!
And it was great to be the Singaporean representatives for a project that brought people from all over the world, over 500 entrants, and they narrowed it down to 10. And it was organized by UN Women in Singapore, who've been huge supporters and advocates for anti-trafficking work. So it was great to see them again and see their support for the work we do in Cambodia.
Tell me a little bit about the project that was pitched during the 5-minute pitch and exactly how it helps women in Cambodia.
We've got a project called Bootstraps, which is reaching out and giving the tools to women who are currently sex workers or trapped in really terrible situations where they're on the cusp of selling their children into slavery and trafficking. These are families that live in the poorest slums in Phnom Penh. And we get these women into 6 months to a year of intensive training with us, during which we give them enough money that they don't have to work nights on the streets, that they don't have to go back to the bars, but they can concentrate on training. And we do it in a really tiny group. What we found is you can't run a big class. It has to be maybe 5 to 12 women, because they bond together, they become support for each other. They know what it's like to be hungry, to be beaten up from a client on the streets, come home and have to decide, do you feed your kids or do you give them money so that they can go to school and pay for school fees that day? So these women bond together, and a lot of them are illiterate, a lot of them have dropped out from school, they almost all have PTSD. So the first 3 months are really just getting them to learning to read and write, getting them to be able to sit down and concentrate in class, and then we start teaching them skills like sewing, hairdressing, whatever it is that will eventually turn into a safe long-term job for them.
What are some of the challenges, of taking women out of the cycle of being in this sex trafficking cycle, so to speak? I read Half the Sky, and it talked about how part of the difficulty of removing women from these difficult situations was working against the women's very own impulse to return to these horrible situations.
Well, it's a horrible situation, but it's not worse than seeing your kids go hungry. I mean, if you are illiterate or have no job skills, it is the best paying job you can get. Being a sex worker in Cambodia is not technically illegal, and some of the sex workers I've met have so much dignity and courage because they get out on the streets. We had women who work up to 9 months of pregnancy, give birth, and then go back on the streets at 2 weeks weaning their babies because it's that, or they have to sell their kid, and they don't have anyone else to turn to. They need help to get out from it. Sometimes it's because they're young, they're troubled, and it seems like an easy life. But within a few months, they know it's not an easy life. And the women that we work with have seen it all. They don't want their kids to go down that path. But to escape sex work, you need to have safe, decent jobs. You need to have skills, and you need to feel like you can plan for the future. And that's where all the soft stuff of building a support group, having community outreach, making sure, simple things like making sure there's childcare at night so that people don't have to leave their babies at home alone in a shack while they go off. Things like making sure that they know that there's somewhere they can go for drug counseling, change needles, where they can get HIV medication for free. Things like that they're too exhausted and tired to do. Their lives are just incredibly hectic and hard. I have 5 kids. I work, and I have all these things, and I go there.
You work outside of Riverkids?
Yeah, I work part-time as well. But, Riverkids pays me $500 a month so that we can qualify we have to have 3 people employed in Singapore, so I get $500 a month. Prior to that requirement, I got nothing for the last decade.
You're a working mom with 5 kids.
Yep.
And
so
charity.
I work outside that to make sure that just to help out at home. But my life is so easy. I turn on the tap, I got clean water. I fall sick, I can walk downstairs to a decent doctor. I give birth in a hospital. I don't have to worry that the doctor's going to threaten and blackmail me until I sell my newborn. I've met women who've had their newborns taken away from them by traffickers in the hospital wards. I've met girls who feel like there is no hope, that they have no choice but to sell themselves because their parents have gambling habits and they're so ashamed and they're too terrified to ask for help. I've met boys who've been raped numerous times and can't even put words on it because boys have no outreach programs in Cambodia. It's so underserved. People have all these ideas that it's just young girls who are getting trafficked. It's not. It's older women, it's men, it's young boys, it's so many people. The real problem is deep, abiding poverty and family dysfunction. And there's no golden bullet for that. There's no microfinance that will magically fix it. There's no
job
quick
training
campaign.
scheme, vocational scheme.
You got to do a lot of things all at the same time. It's like running a family. You can't just fix it with one thing. You got to be there every day. You got to make sure kids get fed. You got to send them to school. You got to make sure they got somewhere to sleep.
I'm exhausted just hearing all this, but if it wasn't for everyday heroes like you, I can't imagine the number of disadvantaged women in Cambodia who would not be able to have hope for a better life. Dale Edmonds, an everyday hero, extraordinary woman in my opinion. We'll come back with Wow in just a while.
Add to your Wow Factor with Michelle Martin in the Wow Club on 938 Live.
Welcome to Women of Worth. Oh, wow. I'm Michelle Martin. We're finding out about everyday heroines all around us. And we're speaking now to Shrutikantha Kandali from Going to School. Shruti pitched Skills at School for Girls. That's a project located in India, which aims to reduce the student dropout rate at rural high schools over in India. At Project Inspire, 5 minutes to change the world. That was co-organized by the Singapore Committee for UN Women and MasterCard. It saw over 500 entries from a record of 70 countries around the world, and Shruti was one of the 10 finalists that were shortlisted. Shruti, tell me about Skills at School for Girls. How does it help 8,000 teenage girls?
Hi. So in Bihar or in Jharkhand or in rural India, so there are kids who go to school but are not learning anything which is relevant to employment once they pass out. So what we are trying to do is teach them skills, employability skills, through through beautiful books, graphic novels, beautiful movies, and trying to teach them something very valuable through stories. And once they are interested in something like that, they gain a lot, and that helps them stay in school, which means that would also decrease the rate of girls or young children dropping out from school.
Are girls at a particular rate of dropping out of schools? Are they at more risk of doing so than boys because of the culture that looks at women a certain way in India?
Yes, definitely, because it all starts with the mothers. If the mothers are not educated, in some way they have felt deprived of certain rights. So we do send their girls to school, but then because it being a patriarchal society, somehow, somewhere, it lacks them having the liberty to make their own choices for themselves or for their daughters. So once girls reach a certain age or maybe high school, they tend to start thinking, what will they, learn by going to school? It won't actually make any difference to them. And then obviously there are other factors like child marriages and many other things.
Mm-hmm.
After menstruation, they feel it uncomfortable going to school, or there are no toilets in the schools. They have to travel really far. The roads are not well. The safety for girls. So there are a lot of factors that combine in. But yes, I think girls are more affected, and that's why they are dropping out more than boys.
How does your program help give girls hope for the future? It gives them sort of entrepreneurial skills, doesn't it?
So what we do is all our stories, 70% to 80% of our stories have female protagonists. We try to show a girl just like her from the same community. We shoot and, we click pictures from the same environment they belong to, and try to show how an everyday story can make a difference. If she negotiated to go back to school, or if she made a business plan to solve the problem of electricity and brought in an enterprise of solar lights, why can't you? And stories are the most powerful tool to deal with kids. they read it in a light way, but somehow, somewhere, something retains back with them. And that's why we think whenever we are showing a girl hero, something who's a very strong character, girls can relate to them and they want to continue their life that way. So I think it surely does impact the lives of the girls.
How can listeners who are tuning in right now learn more about skills at School for Girls?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
How can our listeners help what you're doing? Can they learn more about your program on the web?
Yes, we have a website. We have a YouTube channel where we have movies about the same stories. We make the movies and we turn them into graphic novels for children. And we have a YouTube channel, we have a Twitter handle, we have a Facebook page, we have a website. So everyone at any point of time can go to the web, log in to goingtoschool.com and can check about us.
Shruti, what is the experience of being part of Project Inspire, where you had 5 minutes to pitch for your project that you thought could change the world? Share with us your impressions of being part of Project Inspire.
I think it was wonderful. From the moment we reached there, the kind of people there were, the audience who came to listen to us, the organizers, the wonderful people, the mentors we got to meet, and most importantly, I think the participants who came. Like all the people were working in such strong subjects and, some things which we look at every day, we think we should work towards it, and there were actually people there who were working towards making a change in those areas. And every project, every organization who came and had been a part of Project Inspire inspired me in every personal way, I think, and it also gives you a strength and a heads up that you are on the right track, making a change little at a time, and there are a lot of people along with you who are doing that across the globe.
You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from India, Shruti. Shrutikantha Kandali from Going to School, sharing more about her pitch for Project Inspire 5 Minutes to Change the World, recently co-organized by Singapore Committee for UN Women and MasterCard. Walking away with a brand new $10,000 grant was the Singapore-based charity called Riverkids, and Dale Edmonds, who is founder of Riverkids, joins me. Dale, tell me about the story behind Riverkids, which grew out of your own personal experience adopting and realizing 2 of your children had been trafficked.
Well, I was a very naive, in hindsight, young woman who thought, okay, we know that children are getting trafficked. We'll make sure that we adopt a sibling pair who definitely no traffickers would want a sibling pair. And it ended up that, nope, the traffickers will look for any kind of child, any kind of way to make money. We were in Cambodia and I'd gone there for 6 months to learn Khmer so that I could speak to my daughter, who I'd been told was 5, just turned 6, but actually turned out to be 10, turning 11. She'd just been starved and all her paperwork faked. When she turned to me at the riverside, pointed down and said, before we go to Singapore, can I say goodbye to my mum and my dad and my brothers and sisters? And we'd been told that her dad had abandoned her in the countryside, that there were no siblings, the mother was dead. And the whole story just unraveled over the next couple of months. And my daughter was incredibly brave to speak up because she had been told that we would throw her out, that she would be killed if she spoke up. And she'd been very badly abused by the traffickers who'd used her as a household slave. It was just a nightmare. But we were so lucky through the help of Lizarde and several other NGOs in Cambodia to be able to track down my daughter's family, and we ended up adopting 2 more children. So at the grand old age of 23, I had a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 2-year-old, all of a sudden within, and the next couple of years were a blur, but my oldest daughter had been bought by a woman who would go to Vietnam to buy young girls and sell them to the brothels in Cambodia. And she'd bought my daughter to be the nanny for her little children. And my daughter's one worry was if she came to Singapore where she'd be safe with us, what would happen to those 2 little kids? So we promised that we would help them. And they're actually adults now, like my oldest daughter, and working and safe and at school. The younger daughter is at school. And it just grew from those 2 kids into a classroom on the riverside, into a boarding house. Then we realized that we had a girl who had cross-eyed, and she was beautiful, smart as a whip, top of her class. We got a free operation to get her eyes corrected, and the next week her family sold her because now she was a good buy for the traffickers. And we realized that it's not enough to help the kids. You can't put the kids in school and feed them. You have to work with the whole family because these children love their parents. And I grew up in a rich family in Singapore where there was a lot of abuse at home. But I adored and loved my parents deeply. And I know what it's like to be a frightened kid asking for help and not knowing who you can ask for. The social work that we do with over nearly 300 families now across 10 different communities in Phnom Penh. That's key. It's not enough to feed the kids, put them in school. You have to go down, sit with them. You have to talk to the families. You have to get them to trust you. You have to do a lot of
How important is this
work.
aspect of trust? I mean, I think I've read you mention there can be two families side by side in similarly poor circumstances, but one family will do whatever they can not to sell the kids, and the other family will just look to it as something they have to do. So what does it take to stop the cycle?
It takes finding the family member who's brave enough to say no. And that tends to be the mother. But we have had a couple of amazing granddads who pulled out all the stops, uncles, older brothers who stepped up to the breach. And it means finding the trust of the whole family, looking at the story of that family, which takes months to decode through all the lies. And a lot of our families have sold their kids and they're deeply ashamed of it. They have problems. They try and hide their drugs. They don't like showing their problems. None of us really like showing our vulnerabilities. And this is the last thing they have in the slums is their dignity. They don't want to admit how much trouble they're in. So it's winning their trust and getting to the point where they will tell you what they really need. And when you give them advice, when you ask them to turn up, they will come and turn up because they don't want to disappoint you. Otherwise, they'll just grab what they can and run, which is understandable. They've got to live, but you have to put in the time on the streets sitting with the families. Sarah Gingold, who represented us for Project Inspire and came up from Australia to speak for us, she did that. She spent months in Cambodia. She mentors one of our girls who, she's just amazing. She spent time building up relationships with a small group of women and getting close to them, and not just doing that for a holiday, but coming back and keeping that relationship going through letters, through emails, through support. She's single-handedly responsible for the miracle, which is that this Christmas we will have 5 children in university, which is something I never thought would happen. But Sarah raised the money and she got the kids into university. We just have to make sure that they have the support to stay in there.
You're incredible. Incredible story, incredible work that Riverkids does. How can our listeners who want to volunteer find out more about Riverkids?
Our website is riverkidsproject.org. We're on Facebook under Riverkids, and we love getting contacted. We really welcome volunteers because we could not do all we're doing without so many volunteers.
Dale Edmonds from Riverkids, thank you for being on WOW.
Thanks.
Add to your wow factor with Michelle Martin in the WOW Club on 938 Live.